Thanks for watching World of Q Sport. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome to World of Q Sport. I've got a very special guest this week. He's a former British Open champion, former World Championship quarter-finalist, and probably maybe the most known for that Masters final back with Paul Hunt all them years ago. Fergal, thank you very much for joining the channel.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Fergal, obviously, we spoke the other day and you retired. Obviously, you retired earlier this year. But what I'd like to do is sort of go back to the beginning a little bit of obviously where you first started, when you first picked up a snooker cue, if you could start off with that.
Yeah, I started off when I was 7. I got a really tiny little table that fit like on the kitchen table from my grandparents. And so I played a bit on that. And then the following year, when I was 8, I got an 8x4 table. So to me, it's like as a kid, that seemed like huge. So I basically played on that day and night for years. And I suppose when I started at 12 or so, my dad started taking me to the club. He used to go on a Sunday morning to play games. So he used to kind of go along there, had my first cue. And then by about 14 or so, I was really, really serious with it, playing juniors. And certainly within a year or two, 15, I had my first century. But by then, I definitely wanted to just be a snooker player. So that was kind of the path I took.
So you had your first century when you was 15?
Yeah, 101 I had. I remember it well. Fluked the yellow on 92. Landed perfect on the green. And but I remember at the time, because you were reading snooker scene over here in Ireland, and you were reading about the likes of, Ronnie O'Sullivan and Chris Scanlon. They were making centuries at 10. So to be honest, when I got to 15, I had made one. I nearly thought I'd missed the boat or that I was so far behind. But, they came fairly quick after that.
Well, that's another thing I was going to pick up on. I mean, you went pro in 1991. Is that right? Is that when you turned pro?
Yeah, that's right. When you could just pay. You paid £700 and you're professional overnight, and then there was like hundreds of us then trying to qualify for each tournament.
When was it like? Obviously, you was playing. What was the level of snooker in like? Obviously, was it in Ireland at the time when you was like 15? Was there a high level there?
Yeah, very high level. The game was massive. Like even in Dublin alone, there was 10 different divisions in the league. Like at the moment, there probably maybe think 1 or 2 divisions, but some of the clubs have a couple of teams even in those. So like it was massive. Then of course, then around the country was huge as well. There was clubs in Dublin. One of them had about 40 odd tables. The club I played in when I first turned pro, when I was resident professional for, they had 55 tables, all on ground floor. And there was times there to be full, there'd be waiting lists. Such was the appetite. So it was a great environment, great tournaments, junior tournaments. Traveling each week, most weekends there was tournaments down the country. So by the time I turned pro, I'd won a couple of amateur tournaments and I was ranked number 2 in Ireland. But the best way to describe it is when I was number 2 in Ireland, when I went to Ilford in Essex, Eugene Hughes and Ken Doherty had been obviously there before. But I'd say I went from number 2 in Ireland to about, I don't know, maybe number 8 in that club alone. So it's one club in London in the UK. So that's not to say the standard in Ireland was bad, but it was obviously just a lot more greater in depth in England. So apart from obviously Ken and Hughes, I said Ronnie was there, Mark King, Chris Brooks, Stuart Parnell, Stuart Reardon, Nick Terry, and others there. So even each day practicing was a very tough school.
Did you move from Ireland over to England, or did you just keep travelling whenever there was tournaments?
No, I moved. Myself and Stephen O'Connor, who was actually the world amateur champion at the time, and Tim Dunphy. We moved over in 91 for about 3 months in London, and then we started traveling around for about 3 months because that first year pro, all the qualifiers were in Bolton, Sheffield, and Aldershot. So you'd be traveling around them. And then I went back the following year. But then when I went back the following year, I ended up, 1 or 2 others were supposed to come with me, but I ended up just being in a house on my own. So I'd say for those 3-4 years, I probably lived in England for about 9 months of the year. And if there's quiet spells, probably after the qualifiers this summer, I came home. But no, I loved it over there.
So surviving like financially at that time, what was you wanting to win tournaments to survive with money, or did you have like a sponsor?
I was very fortunate. I said the club I played in Hughes and Clondalkin, the owner of the club, I approached him one time and said, look, and asked him for sponsorship. So he ended up giving me a 3-year deal for percentage, but basically that covered all my expenses. Because my expenses were about $1,000 a month over then, because apart from paying, rent in the house or maybe B&B, you would have had travel, had to pay for practice because it was only new in the club, so to pay 40 quid a week alone for practice, apart from they have entry fees for pro-ams, which are very regular. So I was lucky in that way that all my expenses were paid, and I managed to do well enough in the third year. So his percentage ended up more or less, he more or less got his money back for the third year. But again, he was never to know that. So if it's deemed I made it, I certainly wouldn't have made it without moving to England, and obviously then I wouldn't have made it without his financial help, because that was just massive. Because I had to be in England, and as good as Ken Doherty was and is, if he didn't move to England, he wouldn't have made it either.
Is that still the case now for most players still than it was for you back in the day, that probably England's the best place to move if you want good practice partners and to up your level?
No, actually, we're quite fortunate. The place to go is Antrim. Again, obviously, the last few years I started going up there quite regularly. Obviously, originally playing Mark Allen, then obviously in the last few years, Jordan Brown's become a force in the game as well. So I'm going to practice him with them. Young Robbie McGuigan, like I've known him years, you could see him coming through, and he got on the tour. Liam Graham from Scotland, he's been over there a year or two. And the last year or two, I've been stressing it strongly to Aaron Hill to get up there. And then even Leon Crowley, who's just gone on the tour there recently, he won the World Juniors, which was a brilliant achievement. Again, the last 6 months, so he started going up to Antrim. So there's also very good amateurs there as well. So even if you weren't playing those lads, you still get a very good game against really some top amateurs there. So it's the same equivalent going to England to play those good players. So in that club, you've got 3 or 4 pros, of different standards, you might say, experience and ranking. So it's perfect, plus good amateurs. And also the fact there's a bonus, the lads can just, if they go in the car, they're 2 hours away, whereas England obviously a lot more awkward and more expensive.
Yeah, very much. Life's obviously expensive everywhere, but England seems to be very, very expensive. Did you, when you were playing, this is because I see obviously now you're doing a bit of coaching. When you were playing, did you ever use a coach or?
Yeah, I had various different coaches over the years, even like some from Ireland, and then I was working with Frank Calahan as well for a while. He'd obviously coached Steve Davis in the 80s and Stephen Hendry in the 90s. So that's not a bad CV. And then I also worked the last few years. Then I worked with Chris Henry as well. Chris Henry had worked with Frank Calahan as well when he was starting off.
Yeah.
So my results the last few years obviously weren't good, but I certainly also learned a lot from Chris. And I said various different coaches from Ireland as well, 3 or 4 really good coaches. So I learned a lot from them. So I've been quite fortunate, without realizing, as I was trying to further my career and improve my game, I've ended up with a great lot of knowledge from, a lot of great people who knew a hell of a lot. So obviously going into coaching, that's worked out very well.
Brilliant. But obviously, before I go into like what your coaching stuff now, I'm going to go back onto your career. Obviously, you turned pro in 1991. You'd have to say the start of Hendry's dominance, and also a year before Higgins, O'Sullivan, and Mark Williams turned pro. So you turned pro in quite a strong era, shall we say?
Yeah, exactly. Because again, as I said, overnight you could just turn pro. So previously there was like maybe the pro ticket tour, so you might have 400 or 500 players traveling around a few tournaments. The top 10 amateurs through that play the bottom 10 pros, and that's how it made up the 128 tour. But there was a lot of deadwood, I'm going to say, without being disrespectful.
Yeah.
So a lot of the amateurs, young and hungry, were better than the pros. So they opened it up. That gave everybody a chance up. But now it's very tough because those tournaments, to get on TV, you probably had to win maybe 10 matches. And again, you were literally playing the top amateurs in the country all the way, the likes of an Anthony Hamilton, Dave Harold, I could list loads of names from back in the day, some like really top amateurs. They might not end up being as successful as they would have liked in the pro game, but like really good, hard players. There's a great school, you had to play well in all those matches. So it was great but tough. But again, eventually over years, obviously those numbers got reduced and people fell by the wayside as such, and I managed to kind of hang on in.
Am I right thinking that you beat Dave Harold on the way to the Masters final?
That's right. Yeah. I was 5-1 up, got back to 5-4, and I remember I put a good long black and nearly went in off as well, I think, after to beat him 6-4, yeah. In the semis.
And was that the semi?
Semis, yeah.
That was a tough game. So obviously, I mean, one of the things, I suppose, one of the highlights of your career would be that Masters final. And I think I said to the other day, I think if you'd played anyone else but Paul Hunter, you probably would have won that game. He had something about that place, had something for him, didn't it? It was like, I was at that final. It was an amazing final, by the way. Well done. It was brilliant. But you just felt like the crowd just felt like he had some kind of like power at that place. I don't know if you know what I mean, because you were 7-3 up going into the evening, weren't you? Is that right?
Yeah, it was 6-2 after the first session. Actually, it was quite poor the first session. Like, I wouldn't even say I played particularly well. Just it seemed to be close, and I just managed to pinch some 6-2. So again, felt good going out. And I was like at 7-3. I missed a simple red with the rest. I just needed the last red and the black. I think if I put the red and the black, I go 8-3 up. I think I win probably. Well, I could maybe 10-3, but certainly maybe 10-5, 10-6. I think that would be too much. But obviously, he ended up winning that frame, and then he kind of went nuts. To be fair, it was 7-4. He went ton to go 7-6. I made a good 80 to go 8-6. So I kind of thought myself that might soften his cough a little piece. But then he went ton 90 or something. So it was 9-8 behind. But I do remember the atmosphere. I could kind of remember being in my chair and as we clearing up and putting the last black or so, actually saying to himself, like, listen to the roar. And as soon as the black hit the back of the leather, it was so noisy because probably he was a popular player anyway. But also the fact.
Well, I was going to say, I would say probably 90% of the crowd were sort of cheering for Paul Hunter, and there was there was a lady with me. She never really liked snooker. By the end of it, she was screaming for you to win because everyone was cheering for Paul Hunter. It was brilliant, mate. Was you nervous? You must that match must have been so emotional because, like you said, the first session wasn't brilliant, but then the second session, you're both hitting 80s, 100s, you know.
Well, to be fair, even like that day, because I was far more nervous on the day before the match when in the British Open a couple of years, so I definitely felt a lot more calm. I kind of knew a bit more what to expect. And I said 6-2 up. I hadn't played great, but it was going to plan. And as I said, if I go 8-3 up, I probably nurse it out. And people just go, Paul underperformed in the day, and that was one of those things. But so obviously, mind you, the best frame I probably ever won as a pro was that frame I won at 9-8. Because again, at 9-8, he'd went ton 90, and he was 40 out ahead. I remember losing his second when he missed. And it felt difficult just getting out of my chair because I took such a battering for the guts of an hour or so. Andy says the crowd were willing him on. So it felt kind of very lonely as such. But I managed to dig in, and it was a great. I think I got a good pink to win to make it 9-0, which is like still probably the best frame I ever won. But obviously in the last frame, I have chances of won. You would say I should have won. But so maybe when I was playing, I was under pressure. Obviously I was under pressure. That's why that's why I would have missed. But it's obviously afterwards very disappointing to lose because it was so close. But also with particularly the last frame with the chances I'd had, So, but
it was still a brilliant. You were still involved with probably one of the best finals at Wembley. I mean, I could probably only compare it to Williams and Hendry on that final black. That's how tight you and Paul were at the end of the game, really.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. I said Paul played so well, and obviously it added notoriety afterwards. When in his interview the next day, he said he availed of Plan B. But the funny thing with that as well, obviously my wife Jean was over as well at that for the final, obviously. But typical me, I kicked her out of the room, and because I wanted to have a bit of a kip in the afternoon where he had other plans and how to spend an hour or two. So you could argue he got lucky twice.
Yeah, definitely. That was a great night, Fergal. But obviously, I want to take you back to the big one, the British Open that you won. That's got to be the highlight of your career. Was
Yeah.
it 1999?
Yes. No, it was great to win. Particularly, I suppose, even now, looking back, my career was over. It's kind of nice to at least look. Obviously, you want to do more, but at least nice to kind of look back and if the answer was Fergal O'Brien any good? Well, he won a ranking event, so I think that separates you somewhat from a group of players. But as I said many times before in the interview, the tournament was I got the trophy on the April 11th, but I actually won it on February 24th because they announced the wild cards for the Irish Masters. I'd been in the previous year, and I think I was ranked 20 or so at the time, and they actually gave the wild card. They usually picked an Irish player, but they gave it to Michael Judge. And Mick Judge is a great player and a great guy, and I'm very, very fond of him, always was. But obviously I felt I should have got it. So I remember in my head going home that day and kind of letting that stew really, and then I kind of felt determined to try and show them the mistake they'd made, and the next I literally was going to win the next tournament. There'd been a qualifier for the Worlds in the meantime, but then the next tournament was actually the British Open, because I kind of had my speech prepared when I won this tournament. I was going to say, and to be honest, it was probably a bit salty to say the least, but I managed when I had won not to have, go down that road as such. But that lit something in me. And in around that time, then also my granddad, who bought me my first couple of snooker tables, had passed away. So, and again, during that tournament, there was a lot of 5-4s. Peter Ebden in particular missed a couple of blues that I don't know how they stayed out. So, in football, they say in the FA Cup, like your name is on the cup. There was a level of, I'm going to say, destiny, if you believe in that kind of thing, that week, the way it worked. Yeah. So how much was out of my control, how much I had created myself with my own positive thoughts and determination, I don't know, but it was obviously great to win.
Going back to the first round of that British Open, did you think that you had any chance of winning the tournament? Was you going into that tournament confident?
Well, I was confident in the sense because obviously our first match was the Monday morning, and I think maybe Friday night I'd qualified for the World Championships. Chris Scanlon, I think, had beat 10-7 to qualify. So obviously, if you qualified for the Crucible, that was huge. So I was buzzing, but no, I was in good form. I was happy. I was under a little bit of pressure because I said I was ranked in and around the 20 mark. So getting into the top 16 was a big deal. And certainly one or two of the matches early on, I felt that I was a little bit tight, kind of checking other results. You're hoping he loses. If I win, I could overtake him. And obviously, I suppose by the time I probably got to semis or certainly the final, I'd probably secured my top 16 place. But it was good. I wasn't. Yeah, as it builds, you kind of get a little bit of a good feeling. And again, looking back, for whatever reason, my mum and dad, maybe because Plymouth is such a nice part of the world, my mum and dad decided to come over for the week with their like best friends, and actually the two of their sons as well come over for the week. Now they were just coming over for the week, so if I'd lost on Monday morning, they would have stayed around and travelled around Plymouth and all that part of the UK, which is obviously very nice. So the 1 week they were there, literally from ball one to the end, was that same week I won. So again, that kind of where it's coincidence or so. Again, obviously they were getting excited as you go round by round. Certainly you get to semis and final, new territory. So that obviously added to it, the whole experience. And then my wife Jean and others, they flew over on the morning. So then when I won, then there was loads of people there as well afterwards. So like those memories, fantastic. So I probably don't focus on them enough, maybe, to be honest.
Do you feel extra pressure when your family's there? Your wife, your mum and dad are sort of there. Does it add pressure?
No, I didn't, because funny enough, it was great that they were there, and I always felt it was more like support, and I was always quite. It's going to sound selfish, but I always kind of, in a sense, played for myself as such. From an early age, my motivation. But obviously, as you get older, and you have great appreciation of what your parents did for you, and then also for obviously being married from a wife and the sacrifice she would made. So no, it was more. It certainly wasn't off-putting, and if anything, it added to it. I wouldn't say if they weren't there, I wouldn't have been able to win it, but it just made it better, that fact that they were, to have that extra support. And then of course when you win, then to have them there, the celebration, that was great. So when you come down to get the trophy and Jean coming into the arena and having that moment, so because particularly if you're married and the sacrifices I'd made, but also my wife then, the sacrifices then she had made over the 30 odd years as well. So that was great. You'd want in those moments of success to have the most important people there.
Yeah, and you're happy you got that one because a lot of players go through whole careers, and they can get in the top 16 and never actually win anything.
Yeah, no, and I kind of always, even starting off, I kind of challenged myself certainly to win a tournament. I said, obviously, look, I'd like to have won a lot more. But I think there was, in answer, as I said earlier, as an answer to the question, was Fergal O'Brien any good? Well, he was top 16. He won a ranking event, so I was obviously somewhat decent.
What world ranking was you when you won the British Open?
I think it was 20, and then after
20.
winning the British Open, yeah, I think that season I finished number 11, and then the following year
9 was the highest. Was it 9 you got to?
Yeah, so at the end of the 99 season, I was 11. At the end of 2000, I was 9. At the end of 01, I was 16, and then it started going the other way for a few years.
For any players that might watch and listen to this interview, what is the big difference once you get into that top 16? Obviously, you qualify for a lot more tournaments. There's a lot more. It makes it worth getting into the top 16 for players, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, particularly then, it was a greater advantage because you kept your ranking for the season. So if you were 17 at the start of the season, you were 17 right throughout. So you knew at the start of the season whether you're in the top 16 or not, whether you have to qualify. Right. So the fact that I was in the top 16 meant, I said, that was one of the great things. You knew at the season started, you were guaranteed to be playing at the Crucible. And then you were also, apart from the ranking events, you were also in the Masters, the Irish Masters. Then obviously I got a wild card. Even the Scottish Masters I was in. There was a Champion of Champions that year. I think there was a Nations Cup. So the way it worked that year, I think it was probably on the guts of 100 grand or so before I even hit a ball. But apart from that, you're also playing in those major tournaments. You knew you were going to be at Wembley, play at Wembley. Again, those things even for your family as well. They were kind of looking as well, like, oh, great, I'll go to the Worlds and I'll go to the Masters and I might go here and there. So yeah, it was great because it had been a real big target to get into the top 16. You're literally obsessing over the rankings, trying to get into the top 16. Maybe when I got there, I might have put a little bit of pressure on myself. I'm a bit fearful of probably dropping out of the 16. Whereas in reality, if you do fall out, it wasn't the end of the world, and there's nothing stopping you getting back in. But the top 16 had far greater significance then, I think, even than at the moment, because you can be outside the top 16, you can be quite lower ranked. One good week can get you into the 16, so it's much more attainable and much more fluid, and it's a better system as it is at the moment.
How do you find, obviously, because when you started the tour, obviously there wasn't as many events as there is now, and obviously you've just finished up this year. How did you find it, how many events you have to attend now compared to back in the 90s?
Well, it's brilliant nowadays. They've never had it so good. Whereas there was a few years, I think when I first turned pro, there was maybe 9 or 10 ranking events. Now I think around 06 to 08 or so, when the tobacco sponsorship had to stop. Yeah, the season was only 6 tournaments and maybe the Masters. So you might win a qualifier, you might play for 5 or 6 weeks, then you have the tournament, you might get beaten, you mightn't play for a month or so. So even the top players had massive gaps. You literally could have been had a part-time job in addition to it, even if you're one of the best players in the world. Obviously Barry Hearn came on board and overnight there was more PTCs, brought a lot more traveling. So whereas nowadays the system is fantastic. From my own view, though, last season, as I said, I didn't play in any tournaments in China. I didn't want to do that anymore. I said the couple of years before I'd kind of fallen off the tour and I was going to stop, and Q School had been sooner, I wouldn't have went. But after a few weeks, you kind of said, "Oh, look, sure, I might as well go Q School and give it a try, just so you wouldn't be thinking, what if." I managed to go to Q School, got through the first tournament, so that gave me 2 more years. But I kind of felt, right, unless something extraordinary happens, I'm not going to continue. And even the second year, I decided I'm not going to play the tournaments in China. I would enjoy it more. That the tournaments I did play, the ones in the UK, and that I'd be better prepared for and enjoy them more, and see would that change anything. Now, I probably enjoyed that season more, but results-wise, it didn't. And I said I fell off the tour anyway. So once I'd fallen off again, my mind was made up. I wasn't going back to Q School and straight away the previous 2 years, I kind of started doing a bit of coaching, but my mind, once the World Championships finished, I knew I was done, and my mind and focus went to becoming a coach.
And that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing now for the foreseeable future, coaching and a bit of Eurosport, a bit of commentary as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfect. Obviously, nothing will ever beat playing. That is always the best. But for me, which was always my plans and hopes, the two next best things are commentary. And I've been very fortunate to do that for the last couple of years for Eurosport, and I love doing that. And then also the coaching. So I said I've got the best of both worlds. So obviously then started the season also working with Aaron Hill. So obviously been traveling to some of the tournaments, which is great for myself, even suppose, because to go back to still at the tournaments and see a lot of people there and other players, and so I enjoy being at the tournaments. Obviously, apart from even Aaron competing and seeing that and trying to help him, and then as at home, I've been very busy with the coaching here, amateurs, and I've literally coached from 10-year-old boys to 70-year-old women and everybody in between. So I've really enjoyed that as well.
As a coach, because like I see Ronnie O'Sullivan was talking the other day, and Mark Selby, funnily enough. I mean, they was talking a bit about mental health in snooker, but about different aspects of coaches. Like some might be like a mental coach, some might work on your cue action. Do you believe that a coach should be everything, mental, cue action, work on everything, or is it something that different people deal with?
Well, ideally, I don't think you can know everything, but ideally you should have a strong knowledge of both. Everybody has their own different strengths and attributes, and certainly, again, I know from my own, I suppose, an advantage for me is the fact that I've played on the tour. So for a player, what he's went through, I know exactly what he's went through. I went through it myself. Sometimes I dealt with it very well, and there's plenty of times I didn't. So I've good experience of what worked, and I've also very good experience of what didn't work. But I think, again, touching on to the mental health, and I think on Eurosport, that interview was fantastic. That Ronnie and Mark in particular, two great players who haven't particularly got on very well over the years. There was still great respect between them, not just as players, but also as men, as people. So certainly as a player, I think loneliness can certainly be an issue. Look, if you're doing really well and getting results, the world's your oyster. It's happy days. But I think particularly if it's gone bad, to have somebody to talk to. And again, most of the times if I travelled, it wasn't a coach that came with me. It was my, it was my friend, it was my pals, it was a friend and a manager. And I didn't necessarily so much need answers. I just more needed them to listen, and that I could literally at breakfast say, look, God, I'm nervous today. And I'd literally talk for 10 or 15 minutes. They mightn't necessarily give me answers because they wouldn't necessarily be the coach, but they knew me. They knew the right things maybe to say for me to calm me down, put things in perspective. And as a result, then I could kind of get rid of that baggage before I went out to play. I didn't always win because of the chats, but I had a much better chance. There's certainly other times because I had nobody to talk to, I got too deep and too into myself. And I wouldn't say, well, maybe it was dead man walking. And it was only when the match was over, you kind of realized that you were carrying a lot of baggage or negativity in, real or imagined, to be fair. And for just had somebody to talk to, just to get it out. But obviously, in theory, if a good coach, not only would he be a good listener, and you'd be able to vent any emotions you have, but also hopefully with experience, they'd also be able to give the solutions to the problems. So instead of just getting rid of their negative thought, you could then replace it with positive thought and what they should be thinking. And again, as I know myself, there's plenty of times I wasn't thinking what I should have been thinking. So hopefully that's an asset I have.
Do you think negative thoughts bring out a negative game?
Oh God, yeah. I think you have to be positive. I think probably negative thoughts probably have greater power nearly, I'd say, maybe than positive thoughts as such, because they can be so detrimental. I think at least you want to be out there with a clean slate. That even if you're not thinking super positive, feeling good, at least if you're not feeling negative, and as I said, carrying that baggage in, just playing heavy, thinking negative, because I think the calmer, more, I said, even if you're not very positive, and obviously you want to be positive and confident, but I think if you're kind of calm with perspective and kind of think logically, because logically, if you're 2-0 down in the best of 9, you still have plenty of time, you still can change things around. But I think if you're in the wrong headspace, 2-0 down could seem like the end of the world. you know, when you just compound it, 2-0 becomes 3-0 and 4-0. Not necessarily even because what your opponent is doing, but your thoughts are so, your standards have dropped so far. You know, but obviously in an ideal world, you want to be thinking positive and confidence. That's where people can obviously help. And, you know, if you define confidence is simply thinking about what you want to happen. You know, if you're thinking about winning and what it would mean and how to go about it, you're thinking about what you want to happen. If you're thinking negatively, thinking about losing or what you don't want to happen, or slipping down the rankings, or I need these points, obviously you're not playing with that confidence, and that can result then in playing with fear and apprehension.
Yeah, and I suppose because how high the level is nowadays as well, you make one simple mistake and most of the time it's thrown over.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Sometimes it could be half a mistake, as in, you know, your opponent's played a really good safety, you've played a very good safety, but he clips in a shot to nothing and ends up on a ball collar, or he snookers you behind the ball collar and you can't get out. If you leave him a red to the middle, he drops that in and makes 80. So you couldn't really say you've made any mistakes, or you've just been outplayed. But you know, it's just fine margins, and the standards are rising all the time. So far more frames are being lost from a player being 50, 60 behind. Whereas nowadays, if a pro is 60 behind and the balls are nice, you'd make them favourite and you'd expect them to clear. That wasn't the case so much back in the 90s. It happened, but it wasn't as regular.
I don't know if you notice in commentary as well, Fergal, even now players might need a snooker and all the balls on the table, and sometimes they still get it. John Higgins especially. John Higgins is a genius at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I practiced obviously a lot with Ken, and Ken was very similar. I know myself, numerous frames I might have missed on, I'm going to say 70 or so, but there might be 5 reds left, and if one of them was behind the pink, for argument's sake, you knew you just walked into trouble, because you nearly want to just fast forward the game to when he did pop 4 reds, 4 blacks, and snookered behind the pink and put the red in balk. So the position of the balls, people are greater awareness of potential for snookers, and of course greater skills to then capitalize on that. So now even with that, you know, I remember even taught that early days in my pro career by Eugene Hughes, and he said, look, this is not amateur snooker. You can't switch off just because you pot the green. Great, I'm 25 ahead on the brown, and you're totally switched off. The frame's not over. Your opponent's not going to concede, and he's well capable of getting a snooker, and particularly where the balls are. Obviously, it's basic enough, but if 2 ball colours are beside each other, you know, you can literally walk yourself into a snooker. So that's, you know, every department of the game, you know, has to be strong, because any mistake is capitalised on.
Yeah, the standard's just so high now. I mean, you're seeing 147s most weeks now. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. That Championship League, if there wasn't one if somebody didn't have one every day, you'd miss the black or should have had one or whatever. Like, phenomenal. I know they're very sharp playing that day in, day out. Some players more sharper than others, but even still, like, it is, you can't be taking it for granted. Look, I know myself, you know, even having 147s, when I had them even in practice, they were still a big deal. I was always a bit nervous, always excited when I got it, and always, if I missed any of the colours clearing up for 147, you're always very disappointed, even in practice.
To talk about his black that he missed at the Masters under extreme pressure, but probably one of the easiest blacks. Was that the year after you?
No, the year before.
So the Ken played Matthew Stevens in that. I was at that as well. It was again.
Yeah,
it was
that was 2000.
You know, I think that's probably one of the things he's infamous for, missing that black. Unfortunately, every time someone talks about Ken, they talk about that missed black, don't they? They forget about the World Championship and the Masters.
Well, I think it might get mentioned, but no, I think that's more. I said, if you were doing a book on Ken, him missing the black is maybe a page. You know, him winning the world title is at least one chapter. So now I think he's former world champion. I think what he more didn't get credit for. Look, he knows himself. It wasn't the best shot he's ever played. But I don't think what he doesn't get credit for is the following week. There was a ranking event in Malta which he won. So I thought that was always a very good achievement, because obviously it was a good show, great sign of mental strength to come back that disappointment, and I said the fuss that was made over it, and the very next week to put that aside and win a tournament. I thought he hasn't got the credit for that, to be fair.
No, like yourself, a very mentally strong player. Ken was in his day.
Yeah, no, tough. Look, I know that better than anybody. Very tough to play against. Even in practice, we'd some serious battles. Playing for 10, 20 quid. Like, was really intense battles. Like, you were delighted if you won and devastated if you lost, but always very good because it was obviously great practice for me, because if you beat them, you knew your game was in really good nick.
Yeah.
And then, but if you also lost, it was also a good sign, because if you'd made mistakes, they'd been punished. And maybe in hindsight, there might have been a time maybe we might play 3 best of 9s, best of 11s in a day, and we might do that for 4 or 5 days the week before a tournament. I remember once or twice we kind of did that, so we're both really sharp and knocking lumps out of each other. But there's a good few times we went to tournaments and we probably nearly both lost the first round. And I always kind of felt maybe that we'd sparred nearly too much. We didn't have as much left in the tank, So instead of playing 4 or 5 days, maybe 2 would have been enough, and maybe playing somebody else of a lesser standard or a bit of time on our own. But I mean, because obviously you're practicing to prepare for the tournament, but ultimately it's the results that's most important. Like, if you lose first round in the Welsh Open, nobody cares that you took 50 quid off Ken Doherty last week and had a 147 yourself. I mean, so. But yeah, he was. But at the same time, to beat Ken, you couldn't fudge it. I had to give him my full attention every day to try and beat him.
Was it obviously practicing and playing with someone like Ken? Obviously, must really help progress your career and your game as well.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I went to England in the first place. Apart from playing Ken, I practiced a lot. Like, over the years, I played a lot of frames with Ronnie. Played a lot with John Higgins. Played a lot with Hendry, like mid-90s when he was in his absolute pomp. But I'd say probably I always thought Anthony Hamilton actually was probably the best player I ever practiced with. He was phenomenal. And then there was a spell there where Ronnie won a couple of world titles at the time. There was a spell Ronnie wouldn't practice with him because it was a waste of time, because even Ronnie wasn't getting a shot. And then also, if he wasn't as good, he might have even been better. Mark Allen had days where, recently, when the last few years I played, he was more or less unplayable. You might beat you 10-3. The 3 frames you did win, you'd centuries, but you mightn't see a ball for 4 or 5 frames. So he was brilliant to play with as well. So I've been very fortunate, apart from playing them in competition, trying to battle your wits against them, actually just to even see them play in practice, because sometimes their practice form was even better than what you would have seen on TV.
So you said that Anthony Hamilton was a really good player in practice, yeah?
Savage. Like, Anthony Hamilton's a great player, great pro. Like, is a great player. But I mean, in practice, if you ask me who's the best ever, I practiced with Hendry an awful lot, Ken. But I thought Anthony Hamilton and probably then Mark Allen were the best players I've ever practiced with. And as I said, Ronnie was in the same club as Anthony for a while, and he wouldn't practice with him because you didn't get a shot.
That's amazing. That's amazing to hear. Yeah, because I remember Anthony Hamilton, really good, solid match player as well.
Yeah, such a heavy scorer as well. And his cue ball control was immaculate. So in amongst the balls, it always felt like he was only just ever a couple of inches behind. It wasn't just that he made breaks 80s, 90s, tons nearly all day. It was the quality of the break. His cue ball control was excellent.
But Fergal, before we finish up, I'd obviously like to ask you about the main reason players become snooker players is to obviously win the World Championship. And I know on your very, very first frame in the World Championship, you're the only player still to ever get a century in their first frame at the Eurosport. Is that right?
Yeah, just as well you mentioned it, because I would have squeezed in the conversation somewhere. But obviously, look, it's not the greatest achievement in the world, but it's still nice. And so each year, to be fair, I'd keep a bit of an eye. I wouldn't say I'm sitting at home watching every debutante play match, but I do kind of keep a little bit of an eye out, hear about it, So I said I don't have many records, so I'd be selfish enough to keep that one. But again, at the time, I wasn't overly aware of it. You're just settled in, and I think it cleared up the colours and to finish with a black to make the century. So it could have easily missed at any point once the frame was won. But yeah, it's a nice little record to have, I suppose.
How did you find
pub quiz question?
Yeah, definitely, definitely, and I know the answer if it ever comes up. How did you find the Crucible? Because a lot of people say it's really tight, not very nice to play in.
Yeah, no, you said it well there. Very, very tight. I remember even the day or so before I went in that first match, when I walked in, and I nearly felt like I was in a different. I was in a different room. I was like, well, this is too small to be the Crucible. But obviously, then when we go and play, it's the same. It's just so condensed. And I always say with the Crucible, if you're building somewhere, you would build a better venue, but it actually wouldn't be as good because it's cramped and tight and claustrophobic, and the very things that makes us uncomfortable just lends itself to a greater level of tension and atmosphere. And look, if you play the World Championship, if you played in the field, it would have a level of importance, obviously, and pressure because it's the World Championships. But the Crucible itself just adds to it. And apart from your own issues or history you have the place, you're very aware of everybody else who's played there, the matches. You can remember all the shots. You could be in the Crucible playing a certain shot, and it might remind you of a shot that Tony Knowles missed or Steve Davis missed or somebody else there. You're so aware of other people's history as well. Um, but no, great. It's a bit of a cliche, neither, but if you're playing well and winning, my God, it was fantastic. If you're losing or having a bad day and getting a hiding, and at a few sessions where they just, you lost the session maybe 7-2, and you have to come back at the second one, so you're maybe 11-4 down, first to 13. That wasn't too pleasant. But, yeah, great to play. And again, but look, if you won a match there, it nearly felt like you'd won a tournament. Such a big deal.
Obviously, the Crucible's been home for the Snooker World Championship now for decades, but there are talks, obviously, about moving it elsewhere. But the main thing that Barry Hearn puts across is he wants more money for the players. Do you agree that the World Championship could go different places and get the winnings up to £1 million and become equal with other sports?
It's a tough one, isn't it? I think in an ideal world, it stays at the Crucible. I think wherever the World Championships in, if it's not in the Crucible, I do think that makes it's the same. It'll be still level playing, but it still makes it easier to win. I think the history of the Crucible and the magic in the place just adds to the pressure. It lends itself to it. The crowd are on tender hooks from ball one. That if you go to a different place, and it might be bigger and better, it might have a better media center, greater facilities, restaurants, can hold 3,000, whatever way you want to do it. It still won't be as good because it doesn't have the appeal. You can't really buy that. So I think, as the history there, you're literally following in the footsteps of the greats for 50 odd years. So I think that it's hard to put a price on that. However, the romantic traditionalist in me, does reach a point where that changes. So if I'm saying it should never change at the Crucible, if we take it, I'm still on the tour, never change the Crucible. No way. I always want to play the Crucible. All of a sudden, if it goes to Manchester, Saudi, or China, but all of a sudden, if I qualify, I'm on 100 grand a year, 100 grand to qualify. And as you said, there's $1 million, there's 2 million for the winner. I think it's very easy then for your principles and traditions to go out the window, because as I said, if you qualify for the Crucible and you're on, 100 grand or more or whatever, so whatever silly money they get to. But in an ideal world, if they could increase the money to better levels like they do in the, the money's gone up, but it's nowhere near what it should be if you win the Open Championships, you win Wimbledon. That's far, far greater prize money than winning the World Championships. But it's possible, in order to get that big money, you may have to take it away. Or I think maybe somebody suggests that if there was some other venues, but maybe a bit like the Open Championship, but if it's one of the venues in a row, so maybe every 3 years, every 5 years, it goes to the Crucible. So then a sponsor, if it's a sponsor, even if it's in Saudi Arabia, China, they can kind of, I think it would add to the tournament if you did take it away to one of those countries, that every couple of years it still comes back to the Crucible, just to try and keep it in the loop somewhat. And again, I don't know if you build another venue in Sheffield, even, well, it's still in Sheffield and there's great atmosphere at Sheffield. Will the venue be as good? I don't know. It's a tough one to call, and I think Barry has a greater appreciation of what the Crucible means because he was on that journey. It was him and Steve's mission to win the World Championships in the Crucible. And again, if you see that famous footage of Barry running in like a lunatic, celebrating, he gets it. I'd be a bit more fearful going forward that if Eddie Hearn was more involved, that he mightn't be as keen to keep it at the Crucible, you know. But I understand Barry's in a predicament. He loves the game. He's trying to do what's best for the game, but he also trying to do what's best for the players and to make them. You do have a short enough career, so you want to be as well paid as you possibly can for it. But it's not an easy call. I think there's people for or against, but ideally, in an ideal world, keep it at the Crucible.